Welcome to Beyond the Coverage. I'm Chris Horner. This is your Vuelta coverage because the Vuelta is starting on Friday. Now we're talking Tuesday here, and there's some more news in cycling that I'll cover just before I get started here on the pre-Vuelta stuff. Because up in Denmark, the Tour of Denmark went on stage 1 today, and it was Egan Bernal, the Colombian rider for Team Ineos, that did his first race back. Now, I thought it was kind of a little risky bringing a rider like Egan Bernal. He's quite small when we start racing up in Denmark. Those are crazy narrow roads up there, and you know there's going to be some crashes. I watched a little bit of the coverage on today's race, and I saw Egan Bernal right in the front for most of the stage, staying out of trouble when there's crashes happening in the back. And then when we neared the finish of the stage, Egan Bernal was at the back of the group there and looked like he rode in safely. Didn't get caught up in any of the crashes, but it's nice to see the Colombian rider come back to bike racing here. It's been a long time since his big crash in Colombia when he ran into the back of the bus that put him in the intensive care unit, left him in Colombia, missed the Giro, missed the Tour de France, of course, and now he's back at the Tour of Denmark. Stage 1 was won by Olaf Koy from Jumbo-Visma. He had a great help there from his Jumbo-Visma team with about 3 kilometers to go, and then he had to look after himself under about 1 kilometer to go when it was Jasper Philipsen that jumped hard to the left. Olaf Koy from Jumbo-Visma locked onto his wheel and then solid all the way to the line to win today's Stage 1, his 10th victory of the season. Remember, it was all the way back at the UAE Tour when Olaf Koy was coming from way back in the group, 30 guys back with just a few hundred meters to go and coming up getting top 5s, 1 second and I believe 1 5th or 4th at UAE Tour. So I told you guys to keep an eye on him. Now 10 victories later this season. He's leading here on Stage 1 at Tour of Denmark. Now let's get into the pre-Vuelta because that's what you tuned in for, right? There's been some exciting news and little tidbits coming out, of course, when we saw the Jumbo-Visma's Primoz Roglic joining the squad for Jumbo-Visma to try to win here for his 4th victory at the Vuelta. But when I dissect the stages and you look at the first 3 up in the Netherlands, it's not the individual time trial, but the team time trial. That's going to be interesting. And I talked yesterday on Beyond the Coverage about the sprinters and how much of a factor they'll play on that team time trial event here on Stage 1. Now, I want to point something out. When I gave you guys 6 solid teams to look at on yesterday's Beyond the Coverage, I should probably added a 7th in with Bahrain Victorious because they have Jack Haig, Mikel Landa, and then they have Stephen Williams. And if you remember right, Stephen Williams, he won Stage 1 of Tour of Swiss, then wore the race leader's jersey for 4 stages, I believe, then lost it when we got into the big-time mountains. But Bahrain Victorious with Jack Haig, who went 3rd at the Vuelta last year, and Mikel Landa, who we all put big hopes on and just hasn't delivered that big Grand Tour victory yet in his career. That team with Bahrain Victorious, I'm going to go ahead and add them in to say instead of 6, there's 7 big teams to keep an eye on. Now, out of those 7 teams, 5 of them have top sprinters here at the Tour of Spain, and the first 2 stages after an individual time trial when we're up in the Netherlands, you got to believe those are going to be field sprints. So when you got 5 riders riding for 5 big GC teams here, the chemistry is going to be a little bit different when we're coming into the final of these field sprints on stages 2 and 3. And the one big sprinter here, Tim Miller, if he does show up, their roster wasn't quite solid. They had 10 guys still listed here at the Vuelta, so I'm not certain if Tim Miller is going to be part of that team, but at this moment he's listed on the roster, so he's got to be the big favorite to win stages 2 and 3 here up in the Netherlands. And he's the one team, Alpecin Phoenix. They brought no GC guys, so there's going to be a lot of pressure put on Alpecin Phoenix racing up north in the Netherlands here for stages 2 and 3 on Tim Miller. But he will be leaving the team, departing for Quick Step for next year in 2023. So it'll be interesting to see first if he shows up here at the Vuelta for Alpecin Phoenix, and then how much of the team is dedicated 100% for Tim Miller winning stages 2 and 3. Now, when I break down those other big teams that are racing for general classification, Jumbo-Visma's have Mike Teunissen here. So Mike Teunissen's got to be looking for these options of winning on stages 2 and 3, but they got GC battles going on too because Primoz Roglic is on the team. Other riders to look out for on different teams riding for general classification, UAE Team Emirates come with a stacked team here. They got out Joao Almeida, the Portuguese rider. He's gone top 10 in the Giro in years past, so you know he's looking here as being their big hitter to try to win here at the Vuelta, but they have Brandon McNulty along for company. Their big-time sprinter who's got to be a big favorite here, though, is Pascal Ackermann. Pascal Ackermann has one lead-out guy in Milano, and Milano is one of the best in the world for the lead-outs. Now, Michael Morkov, in my mind, is the best, but he's not here this year for Quick Step. And when you look at Milano, anytime I've watched him racing in the past, he does amazing jobs in the leadouts, and he's going to have to be the same for Pascal Ackermann, because when they got guys racing for general classification and not a full leadout squad, Milano's going to be the big guy that you want to keep an eye on when we're coming into these field sprint finishes. For Milano, just basically the driver's seat there, taking care of Pascal Ackermann all the way to the finish. But they're going to have to come from the back like we see a lot of times when these teams are left without big lead-out teams like we're used to seeing with Quick-Step when they're just leading out Mark Cavendish for 4 victories at last year's Tour de France. I don't think we're going to see that kind of chemistry here at the Vuelta this year, because Alpecin Phoenix is not going to have a ton of help from the bigger teams back there. Now, other teams with big-time sprinters here is going to be Bora Hansgrohe, and they're racing for general classification too, right? Bora Hansgrohe, Sam Bennett. Hasn't been real hot this year. Remember last year he had a lot of complications with the knee riding for Quick-Step. Switched over here to Bora Hansgrohe, and now he's on the list. He's got some help with Danny Van Poppel there that can do an amazing job and do sprint finishes too if Sam Bennett's not on fine form. But remember, Bora Hansgrohe, they got a little bit of problems here too, because they're GC guys. They got Jaya Hindley, who won the Giro this year, and Vilko Kelderman. Kelderman's gone top 10, top 5s, I believe, at the Giro, Tour de France, and Tour of Spain. It's been a while since he's went high up on the general classification at the Tour of Spain. I believe it was 2017, 2018, if I'm not mistaken. But it's been a while, not so long, though, since he went high at the Tour de France, because it was just last year. And then, of course, the Giro d'Italia in 2020. He was fighting up there to try to win the pink jersey that year when COVID first hit hard, and there was so much bike racing going on at that year's Giro d'Italia. Now, when we get back up here and we start looking at some more of the sprint teams, when we're talking about the big favorites, Bike Exchange, we got to look at Caden Groves, because Caden Groves is a rider that can win any of these flat sprint finishes for certain. And again, Bike Exchange have the dilemma because they have Simon Yates, a past Tour of Spain winner here, and also we saw him on fine form that I discussed on yesterday's Beyond the Coverage of his Giro 2 victories this year in 2022. Now, when we come in here, though, when we're starting to look at Caden Groves, he might have some more help there with his team, and they might be a little bit more willing to put a little more focus on Caden Groves coming into these finish. So we might see Bike Exchange on the front here on stage 2 and 3 when we're up in the Netherlands. Now, other riders to keep an eye out is going to be Team Ineos. Team Ineos come in with big-time hitters, right? Carapaz, he's won the Giro d'Italia. He's almost won the Tour of Spain. Remember, he gave Primoz Roglic a big-time headache 2 years ago when Primoz Roglic was in big-time problems on the last final climb, and then had some help from Movistar to bring back Richard Carapaz and wrap up the race leader's red jersey for Primoz Roglic that year in 2020. But when we start looking at Ethan Hayter, you know he can win sprints. He's got a lot of victories throughout this 2022 season. So you know Ineos is going to be focused a bit on Ethan Hayter. Maybe not so much on the flat stages, but once you get to stages that have a couple of little bumps and a few climbs, Ethan Hayter is going to be one of the riders you got to look out for when we're coming into these sprint finishes in the groups larger than 50 riders. So when we look at Team Ineos, remember they have Pavel Sivakov, who's riding on fine form. They have Teo Gegenhardt, the 2020 Giro d'Italia champion. And then on top of that, they have the Spanish Road National champion, Carlos Rodriguez. So Ineos got their hands full in the sprint finishes and the general classification. These are just little tidbits I want to point out, because this is why we could see a lot of chaos when we get up here in the Netherlands when we're coming into these sprint finishes. Like I said, Alpecin Phoenix, Tim Merlier's got to be the favorite, but Pascal Ackermann's hot on his heels because he's won 2 stages at the Vuelta already, won 2 stages of the Giro d'Italia, so I'd expect nothing less than at least a stage win from Pascal Ackermann here from UAE Team Emirates, if not 2 or 3. But he's got his hands full, and he doesn't have a full dedicated team from UAE Team Emirates to help Pascal Ackermann take over the reins over Tim Merlier when we're talking about the teams fighting coming into the finish of these stages. We could see a bunch of chaos throughout stages 2 and 3. Then things will start to mellow out a little bit more when we drop back down into Spain, because that next week of racing after the first rest stage, all of a sudden we start getting into the bigger climbs here at the Tour of Spain. As is normal case here at the Tour of Spain, they like to climb early, they like to climb in the middle of the 3-week races, and of course they like climbs at the finish of the 3-week races when we're talking about Spain. This isn't the Tour de France where they like a lot of chaos for 7-8 stages before they get into the mountains. make sure you guys like and subscribe. These first few stages, the team time trial should be fun to watch. It's been a long time since I personally have done a team time trial event, but every time I have, they've always held some kind of drama amongst the riders when we're talking about 8 riders trying to work in sync, riding 100%, and you got GC guys on different teams that have multiple GC riders trying to save a little bit of fitness, and then full-on sprinter guys who will want to be up there and finishing top amongst their team on Friday stage 1 here at the Vuelta, because if they can stay high up after the team time trial, then of course they can possibly take the red race leader's jersey on stage 2 and 3. So these first 3 stages hold a lot of possibilities for sprinters and general classification guys, and it's going to be incredibly important if things start getting crazy windy up there that teams are well gelled together on stage 2 and 3 to keep their GC guys out of trouble and keep their sprinters in with a shot at winning stages 2 and 3. Make sure you guys like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next edition of Beyond the Coverage.